the farmer! Kill the Boer! The farmer!
72% of farmers in your country are white. If they flee, do you feel that maybe the economy could collapse? You may not have a gap to fill in those people that need to replace those farmers.
You know, I'd like my Minister of Agriculture, who is white, who comes from an opposition party to mine, who's joined my government at my invitation to address this very issue, including the question that you've just raised. John?
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Mr. President, thank you for welcoming us to the White House. As the Minister of Agriculture, it is something that I'm particularly exercised with my colleagues at police and my colleagues in the justice cluster to start making farm attacks and stock theft a priority crime. And it affects all farmers in South Africa, particularly stock theft. It has a disproportionate effect on smallholder black farmers.
So you denounced that type of language in the video that you saw?
Oh yes, we've always done so. As government, as my own party, we are completely opposed to that. We, in 1955, adopted a document which said South Africa belongs to all who live in it.
But why wouldn't you arrest that man? That man said, kill the white farmers, kill the white farmers. And then he danced, and he's dancing, and it's kill the white farmers. I think, I'm not sure, but I think if somebody got up in Parliament and started saying, kill a certain group of people, he would be arrested very quickly.
It's not a matter where we need to be instructed by anyone that go and arrest this one. We are a very proud sovereign country that has its own laws, that has its own processes, and we take into account what the Constitutional Court also decided when it said that, you know, that slogan, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, is a liberation chant and slogan, and it's not meant to be a message that elicits or calls upon anyone to go and be killed. And that is what our court decided. So they will probably want to arrest people willy-nilly. We follow the dictates of our constitution.
And especially we're going to focus on Cyril Ramaphosa's chameleon comments. In the United States, he gave statements, although a little bit vaguely condemning the song. And then back in South Africa, he's sort of almost justified it in a sense that saying it is part of liberation struggle heritage.
He's kicked to touch in that he said that the Constitutional Court has made a ruling on the matter and that it's reached its finality at the Constitutional Court, and that's the final arbiter of the matter. And he is saying that it doesn't matter what his personal opinion is about it. What matters is the history, you know, the heritage, and the Constitutional Court ruling, saying that it's not unlawful.
Your response to your president's, you know, he continues to contend that this is just a liberation chant. It's literally kill the white farmer.
It's fundamentally evil, and it's a disgrace, and he should not be allowed to say that. 100,000 people jumping up and down with red berets, singing and chanting.
Saying kill the Boer, that's a reference to white South Africans, basically, or people of what, Dutch ancestry? How would you describe it?
I think it depends on who you're asking. Okay. What does it mean, kill the Boer?
Yeah, well, tell me what it means. Kill the Boer, kill the farmer.
I need to put it in historical context,
yes,
to be fair.
Please.
It is a song stemming from the apartheid era. The Boer, the farmer, equated to the system that was in charge, an oppressive regime at that. So that song, that chant was about killing that particular system. It's been a contentious song, and we continue to go back and forth about its relevance in modern day South Africa, because you're now in democratic South Africa. But you also have the constitutional courts and the laws saying that actually it is very much in line with freedom of speech in the political space, that there is relevance for those kind of things about who and what we are. Now it's a question really about whether or not it's distasteful to continue chanting shoot the kill the Boer, the farmer, as opposed to actually an instruction to actually go out and target farmers.
The ANC Youth League has pointed out, this is in the first place not a slogan. It is a chant that was there as part of the tradition of our military struggles, armed struggle. We sang it, or we chanted in order to steel ourselves in training, in order to sustain our solidarity. But that has never been policy of the ANC. The question of Boer has changed in content on the basis of the realities of the situation and our policy. It has always meant the enemy as a system of white supremacy and has never meant any individual on the basis of this or that color. And even as we chanted these slogans during the armed struggle, they have never driven us to the houses of the whites or to the farmers as individuals to kill them. Now, what has changed?
The song Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer, you defended the song at the TRC. What's your view in recent time?
Peter Mukaba said, kill the Boer, kill a farmer. He didn't. In the sense of a statement which represents policy. And it would not have been taken as a statement that represents policy. So there's no ANC policy which says kill a farmer, kill a Boer and all that. The ANC policy was forever against the killing of civilians. You chant, you kill the Boer, kill the farmer. There's no MK soldier who's going to go and kill a farmer. One of the commissioners there, I forget his name now, Afrikaner, he said, now I understand. And he then did a similar chant in Afrikaans. You'd find it in the TRC. He did the chant in Afrikaans. He says, and you can't take what it says literally. It's the same thing about kill the farmer, kill the poor. It's not, even during the course of the struggle, it was not literal. So it's an exaggeration to take this thing now, as it's an instruction actually to go and kill. And people who are exaggerating know they are exaggerating.
Yesterday, when I asked the former South African president, Thabo Mbeki, about the chant, he said, this is a chant and it's not a directive to kill. He even pointed out that during the TRC, one of
but
the
it is though, isn't it? Sorry to jump in, but it is. Yeah, but hang on, Sophie. It clearly is a directive. It literally says, kill the Boers, kill the farmers. I mean, what more could be more direct than that? So
the back and forth today about that song is whether or not it's relevant in modern day South Africa. Should we still be singing that song? If there's a grouping in the country
how can you be
that feels otherwise.
How can somebody be defending and singing a song that's talking about killing other people?
I'm not defending singing the song. I'm saying to you that's the conversation that's
so don't you think white farmers would be scared when they heard that song?
And that's the question that's being put to JuliusMalema. I said to you that conversation is happening. It's put to JuliusMalema that when you do this, this is what we worry about. But when you look at how long he's been singing the song and whether it correlates with the numbers of farmers under attack, particularly white people, it's not there.
We have a very serious problem with the legal system protecting people when they chant about genocide, when they chant about exterminating minorities. And unfortunately, I have to add, we have a very serious problem with journalists trying to defend this chant.
I'm not defending the song, and I'm not saying some people are not aggrieved or some people don't feel pain when it's been chanted. I'm saying this has been happening for a long time now. There has never been an example where this specific chant at a specific place, there's a clear indication that there was a chant and somebody was immediately killed.
Look it up yourself. There have been people who have testified under oath that they have committed farm murders and that they have been influenced by the chanting of kill the Boer, kill the farmer. It's on record.
Have they been sentenced? Which court? Which court? Which case?
Ntutuka Chweni testified that when he spoke at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after murdering a farmer called Godfrey Ewer.
Okay, but let me ask you.
TRC,
all right, but hang on.
I'm talking now. Post 1994.
No, you're talking never. You said there's never been such an example. I'm giving you one. I can give you more.
So, like, I mean, the one example we get from Ernst is, you know, an example from the TRC, which is, it's 30 years ago. If you have any more relevant examples, why would you go to the oldest one, which is like literally the end of apartheid, if you will?
And by the way, some good South Africans on Twitter did some digging about that case. Do you know what they found?
What did they find?
One, Ernst often pretends that he just found this case, pretends that he just found it a week ago. Turns out he used that case in a court filing about Kill the Boer years ago. So every time he pretends that he's just found a new one, it's the same example, and it's already been scrutinized in the courts. And yet again, apparently last week, he was like, look what I just found.
Right.
And it's not new.
Yeah.
It's not new at all.
Is there a persecution or discrimination against white people in South Africa?
It's undoubtedly the case. And it's really alarming the extent to which minorities in South Africa, but especially white people, and you could add especially the Afrikaner people, the Afrikaans-speaking, broadly speaking, the Afrikaans-speaking white community, or the Boers, as we are also known, are being persecuted. And we have a variety of problems when it comes to violent crime. One of these problems is a very particular and a very unique problem, which is the targeting of farmers through what we call farm attacks or farm murders. And it's not just farmers being attacked and killed, but being tortured and in the most grotesque ways you can imagine.
There's no killing of white people. We're not killing white people. We're demanding our land. We're saying, let's share this land. Let's all work the land. And if that is a crime, it's a crime we're prepared to commit, because we can't, when we're asking for food, and say, no, you're committing crime by asking. We're having a robust debate on land in South Africa, and that must never be used to silence us by America.
Now, as you can see, right, Malema didn't mince his words. And while his wording may be confrontation, he's not alone in challenging this claim. The South African government and several independent experts, and even the DA, which is the Democratic Alliance, have all disputed the idea of any organized genocide or targeted prosecution against white farmers.
There is no evidence of targeted race-based murders in this country. There's not been a single land seizure in this country by the government or others based on race. And I want to speak to what Ernst Ruth said. It's crucial to point out this, that he talks about the particular brutality, allegedly, of farm murders without countenancing the fact that the vast majority of murders in this country affecting all kinds of people are particularly brutal and awful and garish. It's not unique to farm murders. It happens all the time in all communities. It is ghastly and awful. It's not a specific plight of the farmer.
I will say immediately, we are not in genocide at this stage. We are suffering from crime, and they are targeting the white people, but because they are a little bit more affluent than other people.
Few days.
But a much more deliberate case of persecution is being alleged by President Trump.
But you do allow them to take land.
No.
You do allow them to take land.
Nobody can
and then
take
when
land.
they take the land, they kill the white farmer. And when they kill the white farmer, nothing happens to them.
No, there is
nothing happens to them.
There is criminality in our country. People who do get killed, unfortunately through criminal activity, are not only white people. Majority of them are black people. And we have now been utilized.
The farmers are not black. I don't say that's good or bad, but the farmers are not black. And the people that are being killed in large numbers, and you saw all those grave sites, that scene of, you see how many crosses they have. Those crosses, that's a dead person in every one of them. And those trucks or cars are paying their respects to all of those dead people on a Sunday morning.
That video was taken in response to a murder that was committed earlier that week. On August 30th, 2020, Glenn and Vida Rafferty, a progressive couple in the Normandin area, were murdered at their farm. And 2 years later, subsequently, 3 people were arrested and charged with the murder as well as robbery with aggravating circumstances and sentenced respectively. But that specific protest you saw in the video, right, was a multiracial protest. According to the Institute for Race Relations, who were there on the day of the protest took place the following weekend on September the 5th, the Saturday. And this was in response to people trying to make government aware of the plight of farmers in the country and trying to raise awareness around farm murders. Now, Glenn and Vida were murdered on August 30th on the Sunday. On Wednesday, September 2nd, the former Minister for Police, Bheki Cele, together with Fani Masemola, met with the Rafferty family in Normandin. I was there. I was a reporter in KwaZulu-Natal at the time. I attended that meeting that Cele had with the family, as well as an open engagement and dialogue that he had with farmers as well as farm workers in the community. So there was a response from South Africa and the government to that specific incident. Cele saying at the time that there had been about 7 murders within that area in probably a year. And of those 7 murders, they had made basically arrests in every case. So there was attention being given to it.
You only see negative things about farm murders and politicians and everything else on TV. And this is an experience I don't wish on anybody, but our experience has been very positive. The police have been amazing. It's just nice to know that the senseless murder of our friends is being taken seriously.
There's claims that each cross on either side of the road represent people who were murdered in farm attacks. That's not the case. The organizers who the Institute for Race Relations spoke to at the time said they were merely just trying to raise awareness. And those crosses were just trying to raise attention as to the plight of farm workers and the dangerous conditions they live in.
But there are a lot of other features that build up to genocide: racial prioritization, organization, persecution, denial.
Yeah.
And of those 10 elements, we've got about 7 ongoing in South Africa. They haven't lit the ovens yet. And if you think of that chanting by the Red Berets, Kill the Boer, think of Germany in 1933. They might as well be wearing brown shirts.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. I mean, the media is marginalizing this as much as they possibly can. They hate this story. They hate that Trump put a spotlight on it in front of the whole world, which he did. But flip it for a second. If you had a white political party in South Africa saying, kill the black man, I imagine that story would be everywhere.
What is the basis of the idea that white South Africans, in particular Afrikaners, are being persecuted? And as you said, South Africa in the post-apartheid, the past 30 years of democracy that we have, comes out of a history of a white supremacist regime which not only dispossessed people of color of their land, but also then set up a rigorous economic system of exploitation to ensure the underdevelopment of black people, Indians and coloreds included, to be able to amass economic and political power. Now, if you just look, for example, at the statistics that we have on the racial manifestations of inequality in this country, it's quite clear that this myth of white genocide and of white persecution has no basis in reality.
It's a convenient myth, especially in the context of a declining empire. So this is a sort of white supremacist tactic, which is aware that its days are numbered, and it's kind of trying to concoct and invent imagined threats to galvanize support and to galvanize sympathy.
This has also been the result of a concerted effort by some Afrikaner lobby groups over many years to fan that idea that South African, white South Africans, especially Afrikaners, are being persecuted. There have been a consistent campaign by the Afrikaner rights group AfriForum, who have been pushing that narrative for many years. They have lobbied Washington, they have met Republican officials, they've appeared on conservative media outlets like the Tucker Carlson show. They've extended their road shows to conservative think tanks and conferences in Europe, like CPAC in Hungary. And in all these places, they painted a dire picture of South Africa, where white farmers are supposedly under constant attack, where they're singled out for violence, they are on the verge of losing their land, that they are unfairly being targeted by a corrupt and totalitarian government which discriminates against them in what they would call a type of reverse apartheid.
Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has warned AfriForum against creating divisions in the country by seeking interventions from the United States government on South African policies. AfriForum, along with Solidarity and the Solidarity Movement, met with representatives of the Trump administration in Washington to discuss concerns about the ANC's governance. The group has raised concerns regarding the Expropriation Act, the Bella Act, and alleged crimes against white farmers. The CEO of AfriForum is Kali Kreel, who's joining us now live from the U.S. So you mentioned that you told and you thanked President Trump administration for highlighting the human rights violations against the Afrikaner community here in South Africa. What are those human rights violations?
No country can hide behind the argument of sovereignty when there is human rights violations. South Africa itself has been very vocal with regard to what is happening in other countries at the moment. So why can nobody say
that's because
it is not funny?
Yeah, and that's because those are real human. Yeah, that's because those are real human rights. What countries are you referring to, so that we can make?
Is the torturing of Afrikaners on a farm with a blowtorch, with an iron, with hot water? Is that not a real human rights abuse?
No,
that's what you are saying.
No, actually, it is not a human rights abuse against Afrikaner. It's a crime problem that many South Africans are facing. In fact,
people saying kill the Boer,
but that's what.
That.
Do you know that?
Saying a word.
Do you know that according to the SAPS statistics, only one farmer was actually killed in the last quarter? And you know that according to the statistics. One second. You'll come back now.
I can give you the statistics.
But I'm saying
people were tortured in the last. This is denialism by the police minister. He's lying. We have names of farmers that were killed.
Yeah, but there are more farm workers that get killed than the farmers, Kali. That's what research has shown. In fact, your own spokesperson.
What research? What research?
The statistics show that. In fact, your own spokesperson.
What statistics? Tell me what.
I'm telling you about the statistics from the SAPS. No, there are farm murders are not about white farmers. When you talk about rural crime, we're talking about people who get killed are farm owners who are black and white. People who get killed are farm workers too. And according to the police statistics, there are more farm workers that were killed, in fact, in the last quarter than the farm owners themselves. And all those crimes are brutal.
Well, I'm telling you, you can come to our office. I'll ask our people that keep record to give you the names. And the fact is, nobody is saying that any other farmer should be killed. So it's a tragedy. Our campaign is also to safeguard black farmers.
Yeah, is it, Kali? Come on, Kali, you just said now that there's a human right violation against the Afrikaner farmers because they get killed in a brutal way. That is misinformation, because you're creating the impression that it's the white farmers that are under attack. And I'm saying to you that that is false. Even Connie Mulder, hold on one second. Connie Mulder, I'll give you a chance. We spoke to Connie Mulder yesterday. Connie Mulder himself admits that in fact the problem is the rural crimes. You are trying to create an impression that white people who work in farms, who are farm owners, are the ones that are being attacked, when in fact you are not caring about the workers. You are not caring about the workers who are brutally murdered themselves, because when you are there in the US, you don't say, when you're in the US, you don't talk about farm workers black and white.
No, you are ill-informed. If you look at our safety structures, we have 177 of them. Those safety structures have gone to the defense of black farmers. One of our patrollers was shot and killed while defending a black farmer. So you are peddling these lies. You are showing disrespect. You are trying to say it's fine if people say, kill the Boer, kill the farmer.
Who said that?
And saying, well, if somebody... Well, you said we are peddling lies. It is ill-informed. There's not a real human rights violation.
No,
that you said.
I've said to you that I said you're creating misinformation by trying to create an impression that it's the white Afrikaner farmers that are being killed. That is false. You know that there are black farmers and black farm workers who are killed as well.
Where did we say that?
You said now that I asked you about the human rights violation. You said now that white Afrikaner farmers are being killed in a brutal way. That's what you're telling the US.
I never used the word white.
You did use the word white.
We see tortures on farms. We are seeing somebody sings kill the Boer, kill the farmer. The South African court says it's fine. All these people that are hysteric now about us having an issue with this were quiet. They say, no, it's fine.
So you accept that it's not Afrikaner farmers that are under siege here?
Not only.
Yes. So
if you say kill the Boer, kill the farmer...
I'm not talking about kill the Boer, kill the farm. I'm talking about the statistics that you say you also have. Do you accept that it's not the Afrikaner population or grouping that is somehow under siege here? There are black farm workers who are being killed in a brutal way as well. There are black farmers killed in a brutal way as well. And equally so, there are white farmers that are killed in a brutal way.
Yeah. The fact is, if we have a problem specifically with mentioning torture, mentioning people are singing kill the Boer, kill the farmer, it doesn't mean we are in denialism of other crime. Our neighborhood watchers in towns patrol all areas, and they look after the safety of people from all communities. But the problem with your arguments, to now and try and diminish my the arguments, is exactly the reason why we had to come to the US. We are tired of denialism. We are tired of the cancel culture to silence us. And that is why we will not take this lying down.
Those who have made these claims, like AfriForum, for example, and Solidarity, those who have been pushing an international campaign at places like the Hoover Institution, on places like Fox News, and in diplomatic channels, in trips to Europe and the US, meeting people like Ted Cruz and John Bolton at the time when he was in the Trump administration, and pushing these ideas that there's some kind of genocide going on in South Africa. They have backtracked, and they have tried to say that it's not those actions and their lobbying which has pushed the US to do exactly what they asked. Rather, it's the fault of the South African government for instituting these policies in the first place. So let's take a look at some of the backtracking that we've seen happening from AfriForum in a recent press conference.
We want to put on record the following. Firstly, we did not accuse the government of large-scale race-based land grabs or distribute false information in this regard. Secondly, we did not and will not ask for sanctions against South Africa or that funds for vulnerable people to be cut off by the US government. Thirdly, we explicitly, over the past 3-4 years, we explicitly asked senior US officials not to kick South Africa out of the AGOA Act because of the suffering it will cause to farmers and their workers and the work and livelihoods of workers in the motor, chemical and other industries. Then we want to state clearly that we were not aware that Mr. Trump would issue this order.
Last night, a lot of people watched Piers Morgan's special episode on terrible things happening in South Africa, featuring SABC international news editor Sophie Mokoena, Dr. Ernst Rutz, Gareth Cliff, and Dan Corder. Dr. Ernst Rutz, who for me is one of the most, and I'm going to give this to him, one of the most talented grifters in South Africa, because he has been able to sell absolute lies and hot air bullshit to the level of getting on Tucker Carlson, getting on Jordan Peterson, getting demonstrable influence over the American news cycle, over Elon Musk that ended up influencing Donald Trump. And Ernst Rutz has this particular talent where he'll never specifically say that he believes there's a white genocide, but he will set up a conversation such that whoever's interviewing him will do the legwork for him. Everyone agreed that there was no white genocide, which shocked Piers. Piers literally said, but Dr. Ernst Rutz, you think there's a white genocide? And Ernst had to go, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Which was another example of around and finding out, can I just say?
Yeah, because
he's been doing that spiel, but not quite. He's been wink nudging that spiel.
100%.
And then for someone to say, oh, no, you think this. It was like when AfriForum had to respond to the executive order from Trump and he had to be like, oh, no.
Yeah.
No. So your position is that there's a white genocide. So to which I just want to start by saying, there were 26,232 murders last year in South Africa, according to the South African Police Service figures. Of those, 44 were killings of people within the farming community, and of those, 8 were farmers. So my obvious question, from those statistics alone, is where is the evidence of a white genocide?
Well, thank you, Piers, and I'm glad that you asked a question like that, because I have to be very clear that this has never been my position, that there is a white genocide. Our position is, however, that we have a very serious problem in South Africa with genocidal rhetoric, with politicians chanting, encouraging a white genocide, encouraging this. And
what I would say, though, Dan Corder, it's interesting to hear Dr. Rutz say that he does not support the notion of a white genocide. I'm not really sure that there's any evidence for a white genocide. What there's evidence of, and Johan Rupert made this point, I thought, very powerfully in the Oval Office, is that there's evidence of a massive crime problem, that there are an unbelievable number of murders in South Africa, predominantly of black people, and that's the real crisis that needs to be dealt with.
Totally, Piers. Thank you for having me. So I think that there are three things that we need to just agree that all the data supports and affirms in South Africa. And this comes from independent regulatory bodies, from independent researchers from around the world in South Africa. The first one is that the vast majority of white South Africans live a better quality of life now than the vast majority of black South Africans currently living will ever be able to live and could dream of living. So that's point one. Point two, crime patterns are absolutely clear across this country. The richer and whiter you are, and usually based on what I've just said, the whiter you are, the richer you are. That's an undeniable correlation based on historical rigging of our economic system during and before apartheid. The richer and whiter you are, the less likely you are to suffer crime, and the poorer and blacker you are, the more likely you are to suffer crime. And then thirdly, there is no evidence of targeted race-based murders in this country. There's not been a single land seizure in this country by the government or others based on race.
But when you've listened to what the other panelists have been saying, Sophie, what's your reaction?
Well, I think we have been able to agree, all of us, particularly the fact that we come from South Africa, we are South Africans, that there is no genocide. Thank you, Piers Morgan, because I'm sitting here, the only black person, a woman. I'm agreeing with my fellow South Africans that there is no genocide. Yes, there are challenges. And therefore, I think it's up to the politicians to do the introspection in terms of why all of a sudden we are divided. How do we address this division? But the fact of the matter is we have all agreed that there is no genocide. I come from Free State, a Kwamfan Vrystaat af. Ruud knows very well where is Free State. It's a hub of farmers, white farmers, big white farmers. My neighbors are Afrikaners. I have no problem with them. Therefore, we can live side by side. There are challenges. And therefore, the law enforcement agencies must do its work, and government must also do its work.
I want to play for you a claim that the administration uses to defend its assertion that there is a genocide and there's persecution of white South Africans. Let's play that. This is from Elon Musk and also from a representative of the Department of Homeland Security.
There are now 140 laws in South Africa that give that basically give strong preference to if you're a black South African and not otherwise.
There's been over 140 laws enacted that are race-based and to discriminate against racial minorities.
Now, this claim appears to originate with the South African Institute for Race Relations, which has had some race-related controversies of their own over the last couple of years. But how do you defend against that claim that there are laws, 140 of them, that discriminate against white South Africans?
I think that if you consider the entire law book of apartheid, then amending 140 of them is tinkering with what apartheid meant for black people. And those are 140 very few laws that try to overturn apartheid while keeping the edifice of reconciliation going with our former oppressors and supremacists in the white community. And so what they hold up as transformation laws of apartheid is in fact an indictment that we may have moved too little, too slowly in overturning the legacy of apartheid.
South Africa, as we speak, is, as far as we could determine, the country in world history with the most discriminatory race laws. There are more than 140 race laws currently in place in South Africa that seek to discriminate against especially white people. But that's just one way of looking at the extent to which there is persecution.
These anti-white race laws, Is it what it seems on the tin, or is it a little bit misleading? In other words, has part of the ongoing process of moving South Africa past apartheid been to get into reversal of a lot of laws, which were anti-black to start with?
They attempt to justify them based on the intention of the laws, but what we should judge them by is the outcome of the laws, not the intention. And the reality is that in terms of the outcome, black South Africans have not become wealthier.
So give me an example. All right, Ernst, give me an example of one of these laws which you think is just completely unacceptable.
Well, the fact that the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act says that all spheres of society have to be racially representative. The fact that the Employment Equity Act and the Black Economic Empowerment legislation says that a company, the BEE legislation, for example, states that a company has to comply with certain racial criteria to have certain benefits, for example, doing business with government and so forth. This whole thing about racial representativity when we have a completely disastrous education system. So black South Africans in particular have received education that are worse than what the average white South African gets. There's higher dropout rates in high school, there's higher dropout rates in university, significantly higher, and so forth. And so when it comes to employability, we have a very serious problem in this country. And when it comes to education, we have a very serious problem. But these issues are not addressed. In other words, the input side, actually enabling people to compete on an equal level, is not addressed. It's only the sort of trying to attempt to fix it at the end by fixing the statistics. And it doesn't work. And the fact you can see that it doesn't work by the mere fact that it hasn't helped black people. It has rendered black people in South Africa dependent on the government through social grants. The fact that there are now 28 million people in South Africa living off social grants, and that number is increasing. And if you include people who work for the government, it's more than half of people in South Africa get money from the government every month. It's completely unsustainable, and these race laws are facilitating this process and not addressing it.
All right, Dan Corder, you're mocking what you've just been hearing. Why?
Well, it's just fun to be in the front row of the audience for the circus peers to hear this level of hilarious lying and grifting. So he doesn't name you a single race law that genuinely has anything wrong with it. Then he says the problem is implementation. And then he leaps to, oh no, forget that I was talking about laws. The education system is broken. Doesn't show you which law that has racial redress parts into it could have caused that to happen. Piers, let me clear up these actual laws, because what they tried to do was have a deluge of hundreds of laws and hope that nobody would read them. But I went through their list. I actually covered 25 of the 142 laws on my TV show a few weeks ago. Here's what the laws are actually. They're equity and transformation laws to create meaningful fairness. And here's what actually the vast majority of the laws say. They say there needs to be meaningful representation in South Africa to reflect our country fairly on three things, not just one: race, gender, and disability. But these grifters will say that they're race laws, but if you want to follow their argument to its conclusion, why aren't they calling them sexist laws, Piers? The Institute of Race Relations is a research and policy organization. They have published what they call an index of race laws. They claim that 142 racial acts of parliament are operative today. Now, people use that claim to suggest that South Africa's current laws are racist, if not or as racist, if not more racist, than apartheid was. Now, as I said, unlike the vast majority of South Africans who are now claiming that there are all of these racist laws and therefore the government is racist, we actually went and looked at the list and the legislation they included. Newsflash, it's all a bunch of hot air. Their strategy seems to be hoping that you won't bother to go and read the list or the legislation yourself, and they appear to have just clicked Control F, which is find word, to find the words race, racial, and disadvantaged in every single act. If they found any of those words, they put the act on their list without any regard for how and why the words were used in the act.
A few weeks ago, I made a video analysing the list of 142 race laws as compiled by Martin van Staden of the South African Institute of Race Relations, or IRR. And my goal with that video was to really investigate whether the laws on that list are genuinely race laws and whether they specifically target white people, as is so often claimed. Anyway, following that video, I promoted it on Twitter, on X, and I shared some additional thoughts and posed some questions directly to Martin van Staden himself. Recently, Martin responded to some of my concerns and questions. One of the central questions in this entire debate is what actually counts as a race law? What defines a race law? The definition that he and the IRR are using is what he says is a descriptive definition, not a normative definition, stating if the law keeps or makes a person's race or skin color legally relevant or allows a minister, official, or body to keep or make it relevant, it is a race law. He insists that despite his own personal perspective and beliefs on the topic, that the list is purely factual and unbiased, writing, the index, the table, the dataset, does not explicitly or implicitly pass judgment on whether a given law is good, bad, beneficial, detrimental, severe, or innocuous. The only task it has is to quantify the extent of race as a legislated phenomenon in South Africa. However, is the mere mention of race in a law sufficient to classify it as a race law, or should its actual impact be considered? This is important because not only is there a difference between a passing reference to race or representation and a substantive legal provision that actively shapes policy, most people, when they hear the term race law, are not thinking of a law that is mostly unrelated to race but contains one passing reference to representativity. Therefore, if the index is choosing to follow this binary system of classification, I am going to question whether the label of race law, as the IRR has chosen to use, is fair and accurate, especially when it is being used to shape public opinion and fuel social division on a topic with such importance as race in South Africa. Now, another update, another mistake that has been corrected since my video is that the homepage of the Race Law Index now actually includes a footnote acknowledging that 9 of the 142 laws that they claim are operative race laws in South Africa are deracialized. If the headline number is 142 operative race laws in South Africa, then no reasonable person would look at 142 operative race laws in South Africa and assume that it also includes a number of laws that no longer contain racial provisions, as they are, by Martin's own definition of what a race law is, no longer race laws. So why are they included in that count of 142? On a similar note, in my original research and my original video, I identified 14 laws that I have kind of broadly classed as being functionally obsolete, meaning that they are, yes, still technically laws in South Africa, but they are really no longer actively enforced or really relevant at all in a modern South African context. A lot of these laws were from pre-1994, and any racial provisions that they contained were specifically racial provisions that were benefiting white people, discriminating against people of color in this country, non-white people in this country, and are really not relevant in the South African legal landscape today any longer. Martin's answer for why these laws are included is as follows. It is important for me to limit my own discretion as far as I possibly and reasonably can, though I can never exclude it entirely. This includes disallowing myself to decide which laws are and are not functionally obsolete. For me to deem a certain racial provision unenforceable because I do not think it's constitutionally compliant would mean that I could also deem the Employment Equity Act, BBBEE Act, and many others to be unenforceable because I regard them, as I do, to be unconstitutional. If a law no longer has any effect, then its inclusion on a list that is specifically being used to quantify racial legislation in South Africa today is misleading. The entire premise of the index is to illustrate the extent of race as a legislated phenomenon. But if a portion of these laws are not actually functioning as race laws in practice, what is this number actually telling us? It makes the index, or more specifically the number of 142 that includes this 14, meaningless. Ultimately, Martin wants this index to be objective. He wants to take a black and white approach. If a law mentions race at all, then it's a race law, full stop. But I would argue that relevance is really important to be considered. Otherwise, the index is not a meaningful analysis of race or racial legislation in South African law today at all. It is not even a meaningful quantification of race in South African law today, but rather it's just a raw dump of the data that fails to actually reflect the reality of the situation in South Africa. I came to the conclusion that even being quite generous with what is considered a race law and what makes the cut for the list, that I did not believe that there were 142 race laws in South Africa, definitely not 142 laws that discriminate against white people.
We have hundreds of people, thousands of people trying to come into our country evacuated because they feel they're going to be killed and their land is going to be confiscated. And you do have laws that were passed that gives you the right to confiscate land for no payment.
Insofar as the land confiscation issue, I think what needed to be put through in that meeting is that President Ramaphosa himself was part and parcel of the negotiations that took place just before South Africa became a democracy. And he was part and parcel of a team that formulated our constitution. It was the National Party government at the time and the ANC incoming government. They negotiated into a constitution how South Africa was going to deal with its land issues. South Africa's constitution recognizes that there was a law which was promulgated in 1913, the Natives Land Act, that actually confiscated land from Black people into the hands of the white minority. Black people were dispossessed of 80% of the land that was in the hands of the 7% of the population. And there's a historical context that grounds what our land reform policy is. We have in our constitution, Section 25, that protects property rights, that says that no one may be expropriated of property unless in terms of the law of general application, so in terms of the rule of law. But in the same section, it also says that we take into account the past historical injustices that have taken place in our country. And therefore, within that constitution, it invites the state. In fact, it's not even an invitation, it's a direct obligation to the state to say the state must take all reasonable legislative measures to ensure that we have land reform in a form of land restitution, land redistribution, and security of land tenure. So that should have been the very first kind of key message to say our land reform project is grounded within the rule of law.
There is a very aggressive push by the ruling party in South Africa to erode the property rights clause in the South African Constitution, to empower the state to confiscate private property without compensation. They call this EWC, expropriation without compensation.
That's right. So that disgraceful Cyril Ramaphosa, who's just saying it's just a liberation chant, signed into law in January, listen to these three words, expropriation without compensation. That's a law now. Yeah. And even though they say, oh, it's never going to be used and it's only in the public interest, it's like having a loaded gun in the bedroom with children running around. Somebody's going to pull the trigger at some point.
Yeah, and it even says for equity purposes. Well, I mean, imagine how quickly they could figure out a way to take all the land from every white farmer and just redistribute it to anyone they see.
So this, to me, feels like the crux of the issue. Like everything else that's going on in the Oval Office there, the fake 1,000 white crosses, or the white crosses representing a fake 1,000 dead people, all the talks about white genocide, it's all a distraction, because what they really want to talk about is this underlying central conflict around land reform. Who is getting expropriated, and who is the land being redistributed to as part of that process? Because I really do feel like we should just talk about it, because this is what people are really actually genuinely upset about, but they don't want to come out and say it.
Yes, South Africa's land policy is grounded on three notions. The first is called land restitution, which means that people who can prove that they were, or their descendants were dispossessed of land without compensation, that it happened after 1913, those people were able to go to the government and make land claims. And if those claims are proven to be valid, those people then could either be given the land that they lost. And sometimes if the land that they lost is no longer viable for human occupation, or it's been built up, or it's now a shopping center, they're given alternative land, or they're given compensation. That's one arm of it. That is the restitution program that I spoke about, that it started in 1994. Yes, it's been slow paced, but that's the land, one of the land reform pillars. The second pillar is land redistribution. Now, land redistribution, it's also embedded in our constitution. It says the state must take legislative measures to ensure that people who need the land, who need to have access to land, are given the land. Again, the state has been slow. They haven't provided enough resources in order to ensure that the land is redistributed. I think so far, we're only speaking about 10% of the land that has been redistributed. There's been very poor fiscal support in order to see progress there. The third leg of this is the land tenure of Black people. More than 60% of Black people don't have secure tenure. What that means is that they don't have formal rights, property rights. They live in informal settlements. And this is what the Land Reform Project of South Africa is trying to correct. When it comes to expropriation is actually very simply colorblind. Expropriation is just a tool that the state uses when it needs to use land for a public purpose or a public interest. The best example we can give about expropriation that's been actually implemented is the Gautrain. We've got the Gautrain, which is a speed train that links people, a public transport system. Those people were expropriated. Those people would have been Black, white, Indian, and so forth. It's actually very colorblind. It's a state tool that is used worldwide. And so the outcry around expropriation without compensation is a little bit, it's hyperbole, because even in that legislation, it tells you under what circumstances there could be nil compensation. And this way there's abandoned buildings, you cannot track the owner, where the land is unsafe, there's a safety risk. So it's only within quite determined, easily determinable circumstances where that could happen.
Are you ready to make concession on the implementation of the land reform as a way to entice Donald Trump to make a deal?
The land reform is a national imperative. It's a constitutional imperative. We have to do it. It does not violate any genocide convention, and it has been confirmed by the Human Rights Council in Geneva as a national imperative to redress the past land imbalances of our country. And as I've said earlier on, because of apartheid, almost more than 70% of the land in South Africa is still owned by white Afrikaners. And the program is not arbitrary, it's not confiscation, but it's a process that is just within the Constitution and the process, adjudicatory.
So you won't abandon it?
No, we won't.
I'll put to you a series of criticisms driving the debate so you can provide us with clarity. And pardon me if the questions sound basic, but let's start here. Is what the president signed into law a new direction for land reform in South Africa?
No, Iman, it's actually not new, in that it is precisely what was negotiated and confirmed during the constitutional negotiations in 1995. And then confirmed in our Constitution of 1996. So it, in fact, brings our law in line with the Constitution agreed nearly 30 years ago.
There are concerns about forcing people off land they are on. Does the law empower government to do that?
It does not empower the state to force people off land as an immediate action. It is not a law that allows for confiscation. Donald Trump is incorrect about that. Confiscation is where the state simply takes your property away. Expropriation, which is this law, has always been law in South Africa. Our law up to January this year has been a 1975 act. So expropriation is a process through which states around the world assert their right of eminent domain and acquire property for public purposes or in the public interest. So the United States does it, Britain does it, France does it, countries around the world of different political frameworks do it. So the state may, through a specified process over a protracted period of time with notices, explanations, appeal processes, and court overview, may take property. It always has had this power, but the way in which and the purpose for which it can be done has changed.
Expropriation that we follow in South Africa is very similar to the laws of eminent domain. In America, in fact, our laws of expropriation borrow from UK law, the laws in Germany. It's no simple, and I know in the UK, it's called compulsory purchase. And so our law, which is grounded on Roman Dutch law, English law, of expropriation is no different. Even in America, there are instances, for example, where expropriation does take place for the public interest, for environmental purposes, and so forth. And this is precisely what South Africa is doing. The only difference that South Africa has, if you had to compare it with the other developed nations, is that we're also using our expropriation laws in order to make land available in line with our constitutional imperatives of transformative justice.
This section requires that compensation be just and equitable. We've spent some time talking about that. It has to be considerate of all the parties. But the new Expropriation Act explicitly refers to the possibility of nil compensation. What does that mean, and could that disadvantage the owner or the title deed holder?
Okay, so yes, you're right. Section 25 of the Constitution starts by saying any compensation must be just and equitable. And there's this a principle in the Constitution, and in fact it's word for word repeated in the Act, is that the compensation must be just and equitable, reflecting an equitable balance between the public interest, the interests of those affected, including the owner, and including also 5 criteria, like how the property was acquired, its past state subsidies, how it's being used now, the purpose of the expropriation, and the market price. So that's one of the 5. So that is what frames the question of compensation in the Act. First of all, it echoes exactly that constitutional framing. Within that, it clarifies under Section 12.3 that there may be circumstances in which those circumstances of just and equitable actually result in no compensation. It's called nil, but it is no compensation. And so it may be, under certain circumstances, just and equitable, taking into account all those factors, that there should not be compensation. And it gives 4 examples of such cases, which are likely to be fairly rare and certainly do not involve any property that is being used, lived on, used for any purpose. It is abandoned property, or property in which there is such high levels of debt, say, to municipalities. And here the classic example is the one of abandoned inner city buildings where the owners have absconded and they owe millions in rates to the municipality. In those cases, it is in the public interest for the state to expropriate and not to pay a market price compensation to a private owner. There are also cases where a state entity is holding property and not using it for its intended purpose, which is a major problem. And the last one is where there are labor tenants, people who've lived and worked on the land for generations, using their labor to pay for their right to the land. And under a 1996 law, they're entitled at least to that portion of land that they've always been on.
Does this target white farmers and white people?
No, there isn't any target in this property clause. It doesn't say which types of property, and nor should it. This is a matter for the Minister of Public Works in the first instance, or a designated authority to decide which properties. So it's not about who, it's about which properties. So there's certain properties that would be likely to be targeted for expropriation if indeed the state decides to use these powers, which is another matter. So there is no targeting of a particular group. In fact, that would be unconstitutional, of course. And any deprivation of property has to be fair. It has to be, anybody in the country has to be equally treated in such a process. And that is actually the first clause in the property clause in the Constitution. So this act does not target any type of property or any type of owner.
I think, South Africa is a country in Africa that is trying to build a progressive democracy, that is bold on human rights, that aspires for international cooperation. So it holds all the values that many leaders in the world do not support. And it stands as a vanguard for progressive thought. So I think there is a real attempt, to tell these cheeky Africans that we're going to use every tool in our power to cast you in the worst light possible and to make you appear to the world as barbaric, because you've really reached far beyond the height that you should.
And if I can give a terrifying analogy, South Africa is Germany in the early 1930s. The white minority are being boiled like frogs. There's an economic genocide taking place with black economic empowerment, with expropriation without compensation, with the destruction of the economy. the potential hasn't begun yet, disarming of the population.
Tell me more.
In the first term, the relations were this way of Trump. And then you say you can't quite measure what went wrong. And there are many presidents of the United States over the years, even to people that were not heads of state like O.R. Tambo, that were treated with humongous amounts of respect. Certainly yourself with Bush, during what was a very dramatic international pharmaceutical assault. There still were serious disagreements about HIV and AIDS, but we never saw that. His visit to South Africa, and we never quite, even at the center of key disagreements about the Middle East, Iraq, and all of that, we never saw that drum. There was still a sense of decorum and so on and so forth. I'm saying, with the benefit now of hindsight, the Trump administration has crossed the 100 days. President Ramaphosa has been there with that delegation. What is wrong with that relationship between South Africa and the United States?
It's not. I don't think it's only between South Africa and the United States. You know, the Secretary of State, the current one, Marco Rubio, he did an interview, I think, beginning of February, thereabouts. And he made what I thought was a remarkable statement. He says, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we ended up with a unipolar world where the United States was the boss of everybody. And he says that was irregular, that was not normal. What is more normal is a multipolar world. And he says, you know, in terms of that, and therefore, today, now, we are in a multipolar world. We've moved away from that unipolar, a rare unipolar situation which was unnatural. We're back in a multipolar world. So when I read that, I was saying this is very interesting, coming from Donald Trump's Secretary of State. Then he goes on to say, and in that multipolar world, countries have got their own country interests, and they pursue country interests. And he says, for instance, Chile has got its own interest and it pursues its interest. China has got its interest. Russia has got interest, and that. Then, of course, he talks about rogue states like Iraq, Iran, and so on. And therefore, the United States also, in this multipolar world, will pursue its own interest. So I said to myself, now I understand what he means. You see, when President Trump spoke America first during the first term, and there was some accusation that from among the Americans that is isolationist, is taking America out of the world. It was not true, or not in the least isolationist. He was saying we must be the dominant force in the world. Now, when Marco Rubio says we will pursue our own national interests as every other country does in a multipolar situation, that's what he means. We will define what is in the interest of the United States. They may decide tomorrow that Power FM is owned by the United States and it's in the national interest of the US. They'll take that decision and then act to make sure that that happens. And that's what's happening with regard to the rest of the world. They take a particular position. What is in the interest of the United States? That is the only principle that guides us in our foreign international relations. Nothing to do with multilateral or nothing like that. What is in the interest of the United States? Here is a South Africa. It's in the national interest of the United States, their view. The defense of Israel must happen. and the disempowerment of the Palestinians, even to the point of their eviction from Gaza and the West Bank and so on, in the national interest of the United States. Now, if you then pop up from somewhere and try and oppose in Israel, you are acting against the national interest of the United States. They take a particular posture, as you know, towards Iran. Iran shall never have nuclear weapons, and therefore we are going to tie them to a particular arrangement. And we have seen that as an accusation that South Africa has been bribed by Iran. So personally, I was puzzled by that. What does it mean? Until I came to understand that what they are arguing is when South Africa says we support the Palestinian people, that's what they say. We actually mean we're supporting Hamas, not the Palestinian people, Hamas. And because we're supporting Hamas, given the relationship between Hamas and Iran, therefore we're on the side of Iran. And the reason we've taken up the Israeli issue in the way that we've done in the International Court of Justice is because we're bribed by Iran in support of Hamas. So that's where the argument comes from, of bribery. South Africa was bribed by Iran. But we're saying the posture explained by Marco Rubio, in the context of a multipolar world, the United States will pursue its own national interest.